Hello, writers, and welcome to the Author Burnout Coach, the show where we put the publishing industry and all sorts of societal messaging under a microscope. I'm your host, Isabel Sterling, YA author and certified life coach. In each episode, I offer you specific steps that you can take to break up with burnout and reclaim your love of stories. I'm on a mission to dismantle the bookish hustle culture, one writer at a time. I hope you'll join me. Hey, writers, welcome to episode 27. I have a very special treat for you today. I'm here with Jessica Killingley, who is a certified life coach and a literary agent out of the UK. We're both actually currently in master coach training, which is so fun. And since Jessica also works with writers and is part of the Trad Pub ecosystem, I thought she would be the perfect guest to come and speak to you all about burnout. So Jessica, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into publishing, and what type of work you represent as an agent?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. How did I get into publishing? By accident. is the honest answer to that. I took a Christmas job. I got offered Christmas jobs in a clothes shop or a bookshop. And I was like, books, I like them. And literally 25 years later, here I am. So I actually started, so I did 20 years in-house before I left to start my kind of coaching consultancy and my literary agency. Neither of those two things I ever thought I was going to do when I left. But I spent 20 years and I worked in kind of a few of the big houses, a lot of Hachette companies. I did a stint at Penguin, starting in PR, but then moving into marketing. And by the time I left, I was like a board level marketing director. So at that point, you're really kind of driving a lot of publication strategy. So you're very hands-on in terms of how are things being published, what's being acquiring, you're in the room a lot for those sorts of decisions, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And I always say that I've kind of worked on pretty much every genre apart from poetry. Like that's a massive black hole in my area of skills or interest, in fact. But I've done, adults, kids, fiction, nonfiction, special place in my heart for genre publishing. I'm a massive geek and I'm very proud of that. I now in my coaching and consultancy lean towards working on self-help, personal development and business books, because I'm also, as we said, a huge fan of coaching. And so for me, I'm really, really interested in those books that genuinely change people's lives, because I really believe that books do. Like I use Amazon like most people use Google. If I've got a problem, that's where I go to look for a solution. I look for the book on the solution. That is my absolute first port of call. And so coaching is also, I'm like obviously a huge believer in the power of coaching and how transformative that is. So that kind of sweet spot of knowing a lot about publishing, knowing a lot about coaching, knowing a lot about marketing, and just kind of getting shit done, that kind of became my sort of natural area. The literary agency also kind of happened by accident, which is I was working with a coach. She wanted to write a book. I have got a good radar for, you could actually go the distance in traditional publishing and get a deal, or actually I think you'd be better off self-publishing. Because also if you're a coach and you want a book to grow your business, then traditional publishing is not the way to do it. Like it's too slow, it's too controlling. You're much better off being agile and doing it yourself. Anyway, in the case of this particular author, I sort of helped her. And then I was like, I could send it round to a few people to help you out. And I was doing that despite absolutely massive crushing imposter syndrome.
Right.
And then I was like, well, what am I telling people? I'm like, am I her agent now? Is that how that works? And I kind of went to two friends of mine who I used to work with, and I was like, should we start an agency? And so it really did happen by accident, but we've been going for 5 years now, I think. And I have finally just tiptoed into fiction. I did my first fiction deal last week, which was very exciting.
Round of applause for
thank you.
We just did a whole thing about how there's so many secret celebrations in publishing. It's like we can't give you details, but we're excited.
I know. I've actually done 3 deals in the last short amount of time. None of them are going to be spoken about, and it's understandable, because actually we obviously want all of the ducks in a row for the author and the publisher to be able to, once you announce it, so that people can start pre-ordering and all of those kinds of things. So nobody cares whether the agent gets any credit. We're just, sat in the corner twiddling our thumbs. Sobbing on the carpet. So that's really exciting. So that's brilliant. And coaching just really, for me, it's so interesting we're talking about burnout, because I always saw them as a bit separate. Like I was an agent over here and I was a coach over here. But the more work I do with my authors, the more I'm able to really, really bring to the table and help them with the kind of coaching that I do. And obviously all the self-coaching that I do on myself. So it is one of those things, sometimes you kind of get to a point in your life and you look back over your shoulder and you go, oh, there were some really fucking weird dots along the way. But
right. Like, of course I ended up here.
But they've sort of added up. And it is like, and the fact that, I did a long stint in genre publishing. I worked at Orbit and Atom, which is the YA bit of it, and some stuff at Gallant. Purely because one day I sat next to the publisher and I talked to him about Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and he just thought, oh, she knows a lot about genre publishing. He gave me a job, and I was like, okay, I need to do some reading. But absolutely fell in love with genre, and so now that is the area that I love reading. I'm looking, if anyone's got a massive space opera with a very dry sense of humor, then please send it to me, because that's what I'm looking for. And so it is that thing of actually letting yourself be weird and curious, because all of those interests eventually kind of all plait together. And it's the same when you're writing, and the same when you're writing and shit happens and you're like, well, at least it's going to go in a book one day, so
right. It's like, this hurts really bad right now, but it's going to give me really good emotional resonance in my next book.
That's a fucking great plot twist. We didn't see that coming. But then there's always the worry that no one would actually believe it, because it's too outlandish to actually, like, oh, my editor would totally cut this if this was happening.
Right.
So that's how I've ended up where I've ended up.
Yeah. So real quick before we get into Burnout, it was so fun for me when I found you through, we went to the same life coach school, yes. And we got, trained, we're in master coach together. And I'm so curious. I was like, ooh, somebody who else is like in the trad pub world and also is like a certified life coach. So what sort of brought you to wanting to become a certified life coach?
That's a really good question. And actually, because I'm British, being a life coach, I'm using air quotes here, was just something that, like, we don't do. And I always joke about the fact that my 6 month of training was really about me learning to say I'm a life coach without using air quotes. That was the biggest takeaway that I got from it. Like, I've always been interested in coaching, even when I was still at work. Obviously, you do like little kind of corporate coaching programs. I did a bit of studying here in the UK. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was my gateway drug to that realization of just like, oh, we get to design like how we want to think and how we show up and how we're responsible for how we act and all that sort of stuff. And that was like, why didn't they tell me this in school? So I've always kind of been interested in it. I really loved being a manager. I ran quite a big team, and I really enjoyed kind of helping them do their best work and showing up to help them do their best work. So I really kind of, loved that side of it. And so I always wanted to do life coaching, but I thought, oh no, I have to go and do a proper qualification in a business school, and it's got to be executive coaching, because in Britain that's the only kind of coaching that counts. And then, of course, like so many people, found Brooke Castillo's podcast, Life Coach School podcast. And, it is that penny drop moment when you hear about, when she talks about the model and you understand how all of these things work. And I'd already got to this awareness, because I've been working with coaches for a really long time, but that awareness of literally the only thing that is stopping me from doing absolutely anything is my own brain. Yeah. And so if I can work out how to manage my own brain, then like all bets are off. What can I do? And I was just like, you know what? I'm fucking bored of my own noise in my head saying, oh, well, like I can't be like, it's not proper. And it was genuinely the best decision I've ever made. And when the opportunity for master coach training came up, I was like, I'm not going to do it. It's not the right time. I've only just qualified. It's too expensive. Not going to do it. 2 hours before the closing date, 2 hours before the deadline, fuck it, I'm doing it. And that was literally like that. And it's an amazing process, as we're going through it at the moment. It's like you're willingly submitting yourself to being turned inside out. Yeah. Like I described it to somebody as being brilliantly uncomfortable.
Yeah, I was just explaining it to a friend, because we have to submit our daily self-coaching. I'm like, it's sort of like paying lots of money to have people read your diary. Like, it's really weird.
But also not just read your diary, but critique your diary. If you really want to get like, fuck, that's scary, they're going to come back with feedback going,
like, what do you think there?
What do you mean? That's not the result. I will say, just as a quick, this is kind of quite a quick nerdy thing, sort of, if you understand how, particularly with the life coach school, the model that we coach on, where we have, our circumstances, thoughts, feelings, actions, and results. One of the things that I'm secretly think I'm quite a ninja at is getting that R line, seeing what a client's result is from that thought. And I think one of the reasons why I'm good at doing that is because of writing, having good writing skills, because I can look at a thought and I go to what is going to be an elegant, because normally the thought that we're having is the thing that's creating the opposite result. And that's the reason why we're fucking everything up.
Right.
And so, for example, I was being coached yesterday and the thought that I was having was, I'm really stupid. And the result of that, when I think that thought, the actions that I take from that place of thinking that I'm really stupid is that I block myself from seeing where I'm actually being really clever.
Yeah.
And I think that I think that writing and coaching go hand in hand, because it is about how, it's coaching is just the stories that we tell ourselves in our brain, and the writing is just the public face of that. And I think they are so connected. And we've joked before about how once you become a coach, it kind of ruins fiction for you, because you just want the heroine to stop fucking whinging and go and get a coach and sort her life out. But I think that the two are so symbiotic, coaching and writing, which is, I think, why what you do is so needed and so valuable, because you are that bridge for people who struggle with both bits. They struggle with managing their mind and they're struggling with their writing, and you're literally like this guardian angel coming down from on high. There's just, I'm going to fix your book and I'm going to fix your brain. Like, who doesn't want that?
Right. It's beautiful. Yeah. It's and I think for me, it's so fun to see all the ways that I get to, the better I get at coaching, the better I get at actually like showing up and writing my own shit and understanding what my characters are doing and why they're doing it on a deeper level. And then when I can show writers both like, here's how this stuff is showing up in your head and in your life, and then here's how you're doing the same shit with your character, and how those things kind of come together. I actually have I think it's about an hour-long training that I teach for my clients. It's recorded, that teaches them how to use the model on their characters and like how to use it to plot their way forward. Or if they have like a plot twist they know they need to have happen, okay, well, let's use the model and figure out how you make that happen in a way that's really satisfying. And yeah, it's a fuck ton of work to have to then go back and revise to weave all that through, but then you get to have your really cool plot twist that you wanted, and it makes sense and it resonates. And it's like, it's so good.
I think that's such a genius way of looking at it. And I also think as well, it's about normalizing just how much work it is in terms of like the first 3 or 4 drafts that you're writing are basically just therapy for you. And once you've cleared through your own shit, that's then when you can actually get on and tell a proper story. And so the idea that, I just signed somebody up and she she's writing in the sort of new adult space rather than kind of YA. And I was stunned. Like, I was just like, wow, this is really, really accomplished. And she said, yeah, this is probably about the 9th draft.
Yeah.
And that was querying an agent at that point on the 9th draft. And I actually I made a suggestion to make a change to the end, but I'm going to be really interested to see when it finds a home. Like, it may well go through another edit, because an editor is going to make that. So, that's the thing, is that we kind of, I see, and I think this is one of the causes of burnout, is that stress and that anxiety of like, why am I not getting it right? And it is that thing of normalizing the fact that you're comparing your literal chapter 2 to somebody else's chapter 12. Like, the book that you've picked off the shelf in Barnes and Noble has had about 1,800 million people working on it. So the fact that you're on draft 5 and it's still sucking, like, normalize that sucking, because that's the drama comes when you're just like telling yourself, oh, I'm doing it wrong because I haven't got it right yet, and I'm still on draft 5 and I should have. And listen, I say this because I say this to myself when it comes to things like business. Like, why haven't I got it right yet? I've been doing it for this long. As if there was this like kind of, it's a carton of milk and there's an expiration date on it, by which point you're like, oh, sorry, got to throw that one in a bin, start a new one.
Yeah, no, I've seen that a lot recently with clients, where there seems to be this like myth that is being perpetuated that you're supposed to, and whenever we say we're supposed to or we should, that's usually a red flag, but that we're supposed to be able to figure it out all on our own. And if we need help, there's something wrong with us. And I'm like, no, like, do you know how many people have helped me grow into the writer I am today? And how much help I still need from my agent and my editor with every new book? Like, nobody does this alone. And thinking we have to just makes it take so much longer, because one, we're not taught really how to tell stories. Like, we're taught how to like string together a sentence, but like telling especially in fiction, like telling a story is a very specific set of interwoven skills. And very few of us are just like are taught that in our normal growing up. We're just not. And so having to pull from like, well, I read this book on craft and then I watched this YouTube video, and having to try to cobble together that education for yourself takes a long time, a long time. And that's
Yeah.
why it can take so many books. I mean, my debut was the fourth novel I had written when I wrote it. And then I wrote a couple more books in between, like when I wrote it and when it sold and came out. Like, I've written like 5 or 6 books before I even had one hit shelves in order to get good enough, because I was doing it on my own, quote, sort of, but like with the help of, I was in a critique group for 8 years, or I'm still in that group, and I've been in that group for a long time, but without like formal education, but still so much help and feedback from peers like along the way too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the quick answer to anyone who's going through this, like, oh, I've got to do it all on my own. Dude, go and look at an acknowledgements page. Pick any book off the shelf and look at the acknowledgements page. Like, some of them are 2 pages long of all the people that they've had help from at every single stage of the journey. Like, it's not, and that's even before it's kind of got, when you think about in the publisher, about all the people that are involved in the design and production and marketing and publicity and sales and rights and all those kind of roles. So yeah, it's definitely, and I think you make a really good point, because and I think it's, that there's sort of a lot of conflict in the industry as well about how, there are pay to play opportunities in terms of going on writing courses and things like that. And that and that's not very equitable. And yeah, but the thing is that there are people out there who do want to pay for that help. It's like, you could just do free exercise videos on YouTube, or you can pay for a personal trainer. For some people, that is what they want to do, and they, but equally, things like just joining a writing community, which really doesn't have to cost you any money at all,
right,
is so incredibly valuable. But not thinking like, oh, I can't afford to work with a book coach, or I can't afford to go on a creative writing course, or do a master's in creative writing. But you can find some people who are doing it as well, and not make it quite so lonely. It's a weird, I've always felt this, because when I came up through the ranks in marketing, which is a weird, I mean, it's weird in lots of ways, but it's like, if you think about it, reading is such a solitary pastime, and yet it's such a communal experience, because the first thing that you want to do when you've read a great book is go and tell someone about it. And it's a very social thing. And so there are always going to be communities for you to go and find, like on Twitter, if you can bear it, or other places, or in person locally. And that, I think, is such a big kind of key ingredient to sort of help with burnout as well, because I think if you're squirreling yourself away and you're telling yourself, this is really hard, I have to do this alone, you've got this vision of this kind of struggling writer in your head of like shut in their little garret, it's going to drive you, like, that's going to be so hard, and it affects the quality of what you write as well, I think.
Yeah, I think that comes up a lot of, I mean, there's obviously so many systemic issues and different layers of like privilege and oppression and marginalization that affect people's ability to access these things. But I feel like it's also, you can acknowledge that, but then don't make that a reason that you can't do it. Like when I first started writing, there is 0% chance I could have afforded a book coach. Like as I was starting out, I mean, I was like 22, 23, just like tons of student loan debt, like all the things. But I was still able to figure it out. It took me 4 or 5 years. It took me 4 years to get my first agent from when I decided to start writing to that point. 4 years, 4 books. And part of that was I had a lot of, I had a good paying job. So I could, that, didn't take up my entire life. I wasn't working 3 or 4 jobs. So I was able to make time for writing. So like, that played a role too. But I think I took one writing course, was like a month long. It was like $300 at some point. That was all I spent in that entire time. But I think now, as somebody who has like a paid service that helps people, and you do too, you work with writers, like there are people who can afford that, and then by them being able to pay for that service allows me to put out a shit ton of free help for the people who can afford it. Like if I didn't have people who could pay me to work with them closely one-on-one, like I couldn't do all the free webinars that I do and offer like the free critiques that I offer occasionally. And like I feel like it's both, like it feeds the kind of whole ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly that. Because, this podcast, for example, that wouldn't be able to exist. You wouldn't be able to spend the time writing the content that you put out, like you say, all of that stuff. And so I there is a lot of ground to cover in making publishing and writing and all those things more equitable, like no question. And small steps are being made. Like I think publishing is made up of nice people. Like it gets to a conglomerate level and then it all can be quite overwhelming and sort of faceless, but at the heart of it, it's run by people who love books and who love storytelling. It's that thing of wanting to really acknowledge the people who are writing in a space where they are from a marginalized background and they are really, really struggling, because it's so hard, but it's so important. And the gift that they're giving the people that come after them to show them what's possible is just so valuable. And the contribution that makes to representation and all of those things, like it's that, it's trailblazing. And and it's hard because they shouldn't have to do that emotional labor,
right?
But that there is a halo effect of just how beneficial that is. And so it's a really sticky, complicated subject for sure. But I think anything that gets more words out in the world that moves people, and books, like I say, books change lives. Yeah. And that's not just I do it from a non-fiction perspective, but fiction, like we've all had our lives changed when we were kids by books, like that's and anyone who's out there putting out into the world more of that. I think we definitely need more of that at the moment.
Yeah, I always like, this actually is a perfect segue. So just to kind of wrap that up, I always like to think of it as like a both and. Like, yes, we can, I think, agree that it is factually harder for some people, and like, are you going to let that stop you? Like, and how are you going to think about it?
100%.
And how are you going to keep going despite the fact? Because I don't want people to gaslight themselves and be like, well, it should be just as easy. Like, it's not. Like, racism is a real thing. There's all sorts of inequities in traditional publishing. Like, that shit's real. And how can you be in control of like what you're choosing to do?
Yes. How are you showing up? How are you choosing to respond to that in the face of those inequitable system? So I think I completely agree, because otherwise you just like, it just does beat you down, and then that outlet of your creativity never gets to flourish, and that's really sad.
So kind of what you're saying, I think about like how publishing is made up of like people who love books. I would love to kind of shift a little bit. I do mostly focus on the writers and the authors, but I would love to kind of hear, because you are in that industry kind of level, like what are you seeing with Burnout, with like fellow agents and with editors? Like, what is sort of happening in the sort of more structural stuff?
I mean, in a way, I am ridiculously privileged. I work for myself. I actually spend most of my time at home. And so I am, and I have kind of two businesses. It was a lot of work to get here, but I'm incredibly privileged in that I have support structures around me that's allowed me the space to do that. And it's really hard, because looking back into kind of what people in publishing are going through, I mean, I think one of the worst, I can't even imagine how awful this must have been, but during the pandemic, when everyone was working at home, like if you're a junior member of staff and you're in a flat share with 3 or 4 other people, and you're all expected to be on Zoom at the same time in meetings at your kitchen table, like how the fuck did people manage that? Like that must have been so incredibly stressful. And so I think it's like not surprising, and then particularly because you're talking to all the senior people who are living in their nice houses with their big gardens, right. And I'm one of them. Like I hold my hand up to that. And that's really hard. And I think that we've kind of come back into the world, and we've come back and some of the offices, I think they're going back in a little bit more, and all those sorts of things, starting to find normalcy again. And we're sort of forgetting that there is a lot of kind of collective and personal healing that we need to do. Like our nervous systems are completely shredded. And it's like, we're just now going back to business as usual without kind of acknowledging that. So I think understandably, the workload hasn't diminished. I think there's a massive backlog. Like we're seeing like some publishers closing their lists to submissions because they've got a backlog. If I'm doing a deal now, where are we? We're July 22, like the book won't be coming out till middle of 24. So, we've got a long tail, because, and also for authors, like I had authors that were published, like debut authors that were published into the pandemic. Their books didn't get into any shops. And it's a horrible experience for them. And it's really, really sad, because I'm a big believer in it's never just about your one shot, but you do only publish your first debut book for the first time once.
Right.
And so, that's been hard. And I think we kind of have to, if we don't acknowledge that and we don't sit down and kind of do the work individually, and, you know, hopefully the publishing companies, I've seen there's been a lot of like industry moves, and I think there is, the natural thing is to think, oh, I've been really stressed out at this job, I'm going to go and move to a different company. Like, I'm not entirely sure that solves the problem, because it is that thing of like, you know, it's not the job of your job to make you happy, which is like it's a bit triggery. I get that. But, you know, I'm very aware that I get to say that and I'm sat like half the time at home in my pajamas. And so I feel a bit personally removed from it. However, that was intentional on my part. Like, I left to remove myself from that, because I could kind of, like, when I had no idea that what was going to happen, but I could sort of see that the way that I operated in a, you know, being, you know, in a sort of neurodivergent, working in an open plan office and stuff like that was kind of, that was a challenge.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, I really, really hope that the publishers recognize their kind of pastoral care role in actually really taking care of their staff, and that, you know, so many agents also, you know, a lot of them do work for themselves, and that, I think, that's really hard when you run your own business, to know when to stop working for the day and things like that. It's like that took me a long time to do, and I'm there now, but it wasn't without a huge amount of ugly crying on the carpet. Like, it is hard, and I think so, you know, and that's why I think coaching is so much more, even more valuable, and it's going to become even more valuable, because it helps an individual who feels at mercy of a kind of an employer or of a corporate ecosystem, not take back some control of their own experience and that their own kind of authority, so that, you know, they are overworked. You know, it's easy for me to go, oh, well, just go home on time, or don't do emails at the weekend. I know from my experience that that's not practical, because, like, stuff, you know, it's really interesting. Like, we talk a lot about doing B- work. I struggle with that, because I'm not going to do B- work if the work I'm doing is sending a pitch to a publisher for an author. Like, they don't want me doing B- work then.
Right.
And so there is this pressure, I think, within the publishing industry, because everybody cares, that they always feel that they have to bring their A game. And so I think, like, there has to be a top-down level of support.
Yeah.
But equally, I think people need to know that they have the permission to do the work, to get the help, to take care of themselves, and to work out what their non-negotiables are in life, so that they are actually taking control of their quality of life.
Yeah, it's kind of like this two-pronged. Like, I think long term we absolutely need some structural change, because I like can't like the number of times I've gotten an edit letter from my editor at like 11 p.m. on like a Friday. It's like, they shouldn't have to do that. Like, that shouldn't have to be part of their role. And I think that's why we see such an exodus of people leaving publishing, because they love books. And I think when you have people who love the work that they do, it's really easy for, you know, the sort of toxic capitalistic structure to sort of like take advantage of that and put on way more work than they should be. And, you know, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, like, our editors are so publishing, everybody is so underpaid for the amount of work that they're doing. And then it's not really affecting, you know, the big people who, you know, own these corporations, but like, it's affecting the editors, it's affecting marketing folks. And then it trickles down and affects the writers. When an editor is, you know, 3 months late on an edit, that's 3 months later that we don't get paid. We don't have money to take care of our family. Completely. And that is just like, I mean, that's something I'm like shaking my fist a little bit right now. And like, my UK deal for The Coldest Touch, like, we finalized that, like, we like set the deal, I don't know, it was like March or April of 2021. Book came out December of 2021. We finally finished the contract like a month ago.
Like, contracts are, it's like labyrinthine. It's insane. I mean, publishing maths is confusing anyway, but like, contracts are a whole, like, I'm not like, no author of mine should ever just have me relying on them reading their contract for them. I mean, I kind of like, I'm not a complete muppet, but it's so, I mean, you know, the thing is, actually, like, I think the truism of this all is that publishing, as much as I love it, the actual business model of publishing is completely fucked. Like, it just is
awful. Yeah.
Like, if you like were going to build it from the ground up, there's absolutely no way that you would do it. And actually, that is why I'm such a big fan of self-publishing, even though I am like, I've got a hat to foot into it, because I'm just like, anything that disrupts that, and, you know, puts money into authors' pockets quicker, puts great books into a reader's hands quicker, Yes, it can be. It's interesting because I think a lot of people want to go into traditional publishing because they think they're going to get their marketing and PR taken care of, and it's like, I don't know where that myth started, because it ain't true. Like that's not how it works, and people do get very uppity and a bit entitled about like, but why? And it's like, they were never going to do that. They're brilliant at amplifying what you are already doing. So if you are good at marketing, like self-publishing, man, you'll make more money probably. But not to, bite the hand that feeds us all. But I just think that I think I'm always a big fan of giving people, when there are more options, then the system has to get better, because the system has to work hard to keep people. Mm-hmm. And so, whether it's like an employer, because, well, I could go and start my own business and become an entrepreneur. So what's going to keep me in this seat at this company? Or whether it's an author of like, well, you're not getting my book into a retailer, it's only going on Amazon. What's stopping me doing that myself and just, making 60-70% royalties instead of 10% royalties? Yeah. That has to make them up their game, because they then have to fight to keep, and they have to, I get there's the curation thing, but like anything that like raises the bar is a good thing. So anything that kind of can disrupt the industry in order to do that, I'm all for.
Yeah, I'm so curious to see. I feel like the pandemic has allowed, at least in the US, I don't know how, again, I don't know if it's a little different with UK publishers and stuff. Regardless, like they've sort of used the pandemic as a way to make it even harder for authors to get paid. Like they're splitting payments into like 4 and 5 installments for not that big of book deals. It's impossible these days pretty much to get a 2 payment payout. Like they're making it so hard. And I'm like, you do realize that we're the ones that write the books. Like, what are you doing? Like, if there's so many other options now, like I'm like surprised that they haven't made the shift more strongly yet to make it more equitable for the authors, because it's just not. And now they're doing like advances where it's like on signing, on, edits, on release, and then like 6 months after release and a year after release. I'm like, it's not an advance if the book's already out. Like that's how I feel. Like my book's been out in the UK for like 7 months and I have not gotten a dime from that book yet. And I'm like, come on, it's not an advance anymore. Like what is happening?
It is really difficult. And it is difficult because obviously then you don't have a shot at earning out and then never seeing any royalties. So like, yeah, it's a massively imperfect system. I mean, like I say, though, I think, not wanting to sort of jump to the defense of the big conglomerate, but I know that the people inside it, like they want that too. Nobody's editor is sitting there like on Scrooge McDuck piles of cash.
Right. Yeah.
And and it is the same in terms of kind of the burnout workload. But it's like, I might send an email on Sunday, but that's because I probably spent Thursday arsing around doing something completely random instead of working. So for me, like, because I work for myself, like the concept of a weekend is much more fluid for me, and I get to choose that. And that's, but I say, I absolutely acknowledge the privileged position that I'm in to do that. One of the things that when the workplace doesn't encourage is holding boundaries, and we're not like junior staff are not encouraged to hold, like when nobody's taught them, nobody's encouraged them, they're not having that modeled from senior staff. And it's a thing, it's just that thing of like, oh, I'm allowed to say no. Like it's not a culture where that is given as an option, which is, people need to be able to have that kind of personal sense of agency, I think.
I think that is such a big important thing. I have so much empathy and respect for all of the individual players. Like I don't get like upset with like the editor who took, quote unquote, too long on an edit. They were set up to fail by the system. Like the system gave them too much, allowed them to get into a system where they're burning out. And so it's very much, and it's not, and I get like the contracts department, like they're also probably overworked and they have so many contracts to sort through. Like, so it's very much like it's a system problem, not a people problem in a lot of ways.
Definitely. And, I would say to counter that there are lots of smaller independent publishers springing up, particularly in areas of kind of like marginalized representation. And, they're starting to have different business models. Like you might not get an advance up front, but you're going to earn royalties straight away. And actually, like, we're conditioned to think, well, hang on a minute, I want an advance. But actually, maybe when you look at it, the numbers, I'm seeing more and more of that coming through, that actually that might be, in the long run, a better option for you, because also it isn't, you're not getting the immediate money up front, but you will earn royalties quicker. And the company that you're with is better set up, that you'll have a better publishing experience, and you won't be so stressed, and that your editor isn't being. And so I think there are, like, I hope that we see, and we haven't even gotten into like the clusterfuck of the actual book retail market, because that's a whole other conversation. But like,
yeah,
that we see more of those kind of independent, and that we're able as an industry to able to support more of those grassroots publishing companies, particularly where, like I say, where it's a kind of about representation. I think that, we were both talking about Trudy LeBron's anti-racist business book recently, that we which I know that that came out from a like a really brilliant small little independent publisher, and it's like seeing more of those Row House Books, I think it's called, seeing more of those coming through to support authors and us being amenable to there being a different kind of business model. And that we look at things because we can see that the old way is, like, apart from for some very few big authors, it's broken. I mean, it's really interesting to see, in the kind of, in the YA fantasy genre, or just general fantasy, look what's happening on TikTok, because that is breaking the publishing model, because you're getting fantasy writers on there. And it's interesting because I've seen a few examples where they've gone and sold hundreds of thousands of books on their own.
Oh, wow.
And then they get picked up by a publisher. And you can kind of think, well, why has the author done that? Because it could be that, like, well, that was just a dumb thing. Or actually, then it actually is opening them out to being able to go and get translation deals and film and TV and all sorts of things. And so behind the scenes, there might be a very, very good reason. But a publisher now has to be like, well, what am I going to bring to the table? Because if you've got an author that's got a great marketing platform, is completely plugged into that community of fans, can put a book up for pre-order and get 1,000 pre-orders in a couple of days, a publisher's got to bring something pretty significant to the table to kind of beat that. And it's not just about the money, it is about the publishing experience and the ongoing relationship and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I kind of see it, I think, hopefully I try and see it from all kind of ways, because I do love traditional publishing. It is what I've done all of my life, but I also really love self-publishing. And because I love marketing, I love thinking about, well, how can, and it's, by the way, like literally book marketing is probably one of the hardest things. Like, it's just very difficult. And so the people that are good at that, and there are people who are out there that help people who do that, like, they are saints in my book. Like, it's just like, let's rewrite how it can go down. It's been a bit of a manifesto there. I'm getting quite,
so I'm it sort of gives us a good way to sort of, like, I got one more question, and then we can sort of, I'll let you talk a little bit about your mastermind that you're feeling right now. But sort of with all of that stuff that's happening, like, what advice do you give to authors to sort of, yes, all that's happening, and now how do I stay focused on my work and not get burnt out when I still do want to be trad published? Like, how do you have that conversation with folks?
That's a good question. maybe get like a waiting job as well. I don't know.
Right.
It's sort of like, I mean, I was going to say it sounds cheesy. It doesn't sound cheesy to you and me, because this is what we do, but it is about knowing what your why is. And it's really interesting, because when I speak to people who want to write nonfiction in the kind of self-help and business sort of book area, like, they say to me, oh, I've always wanted to write a book. So my response to that is, like, nobody fucking cares. People have people aren't buying your personal development book because they want to make you feel good about the fact that you've always they're buying your personal development book because they've got a problem and they need you to solve it. So the fact that you always wanted to be a writer. With fiction, I think it's a different thing, because, like, it's a very different, like, the end objective of why you're writing. Because with fiction, of course, you want your stuff to find a readership, but I think there's much more, certainly in the fiction writers that I've worked with over my career, there's much more of that compulsion of, I have to write. Like, it's not writing is not an option for me. Like, if something could go wonky in my brain if I'm not exploring this side of my creativity. And just remember that. So I'm always about, like, what is the ultimate objective and what is the ultimate outcome, even when you're writing fiction, because it could just be, I just want to get it down on paper. And if 10 people read it, that would be amazing. Like, I would be really, really proud of myself. And that is fine. Like, that is a really, really valuable, valid reason to be writing. Or it might be like, I want to be the next John Grisham, also completely fine. Like that, there's always going to be room for that. So I think knowing what that is, you know, I talk in when I'm teaching people to do nonfiction, but I talk about like, you know what your North Star is. Because there are going to be times when you are going to want to throw your laptop out the window and like come back to what's it meaning for me? What is it? What is, you know, what am I getting out of it in a kind of transactional sense? But how is this satisfying my soul? But also, what is this going to be doing for the end reader? And one of the things I make my clients do is write their dream Amazon review and stick it on their desk above their computer, so that they can connect to, because it is about, at the end of the day, I said, oh, you know, it's a very solitary pursuit. It is about a one-to-one conversation between you and that reader. And the fact that you know, as an author, to be able to be in somebody's brain like that and to change their brain chemistry with your words is like a huge privilege. And you should honor that it's hard work, and so be proud of yourself. And it's don't just be proud of yourself when you get the deal or you get the good review. Be proud of yourself when you've written a shit draft. Yeah. Be proud of yourself when you've got 15 rejections, because those are the times when you really need to show up for yourself. It's not just about the big like woohoo deals.
Yeah, I do a whole thing with my clients about like, what are all of the tiny things that you can celebrate, like nailing a bit of dialogue, figuring out that plot hole. Like otherwise you work for years, and then if you don't get like the book deal, you don't get the agent, then it feels like you didn't accomplish anything, but you had wins every step of the way.
Yeah. And this is something that obviously we would both be coaching on, is that like, don't make your sense of success and validation be on a physical end goal, on your circumstance. Like I'm not going to be like, I rant all the time about people wanting to be a bestseller. Like, why? Who the fuck? Like, it's an algorithm hack on Amazon. It means absolutely fucking nothing. For me, with the self-help books, I want people to get 5-star reviews, because I want that book to be useful to people, not a bestseller. It's nothing. And so like, getting great reviews to me is much more of a marker of success at that stage of the journey. Showing up for yourself enough to take the lid off your pen, like that is you say celebrating a single step, like that should be it's the circumstances are going to come and go, and some of them are going to be good and some of them are going to be bad. And if you keep tying your self-worth to those circumstances, that's the thing that's going to kind of lead you to be burnt out, because you're never in that, like I said, that sort of sense of personal authority and agency. So just sort of be more you. It's the you-ness of you that's going to get you through it.
I think is it Simone Soul who says that there is a U-shaped hole in the universe and only you can fill it?
That sounds like the sort of thing she'd say, crazy unicorn creature that she is. But also, like if we're quoting other life coach coaches at the event that we were in earlier this year in Austin, Judith Gatton did a really, really amazing speech about the fact that like, if there is a gap, you know, it's like that, and you're uncertain, it's the same thing. It's like that gap is calling you. And there is always going to be a gap, because your book is unique, and so it's currently not existing. So when you think about writing, think about it being sucked out of you because there's a vacuum that needs to be filled. And it has its place. It has its place in the universe. And so by not writing it, you are disturbing the natural order of things. There we go. How's that for pressure? Physics wants you to write your book.
I love that. That is a perfect. And why don't you go ahead and tell the people about how they can work with you, the types of writers that you want to work with, both as with your coach hat, and then also if you want to with your agent hat, and then we'll get ourselves wrapped up.
Oh, cool. So yes, so with my coaching hat on, I tend to work with other coaches and consultants who want to write a kind of, you know, like a practical how-to self-help book. Lots of people say, oh, I want to write my biography. Again, I say to them, nobody cares. But what I want to be able to do for those people is to show them how they can use their story as a vehicle to teach other people. I always say a book about you has to be a book about me. And so, yeah, so my next thing is in September, I'm starting a very small group, like kind of 10 people in a mastermind, to take people. I have a signature program called the Authority Blueprint, as an author, because I always say I'm the sort of person that has a visual pun and an audio medium. That's exactly the kind of person I am. So, you know, like how you're stepping into your authority as an author. And I literally take people through from the like ideating that crappy, I think I kind of want to write a book about this, all the way through to planning it, writing it, editing it, self-publishing it, promoting it, launching it, carrying it on, selling. So it's literally nose to tail. That's available for self-study, but in September, I'm going to be kind of doing a live round of that with a small group of people. So we'll have kind of Slack channel and fortnightly coaching. I always kind of tiptoe into saying, so, I'll drag a book out of you. I'm not going to drag a book out of you. You're going to drag a book out of yourself. But I'm going to be on the sidelines I've been described as having a whip in one hand and chocolate biscuits in the other. So that's me. When it comes to being an agent, so my agency is called the BKS Agency, and so you can submit to me via that website. I am predominantly, I have dipped my toe into a little bit of fiction, but I'm not open to fiction submissions. I did say before we jumped on that, I said, unless you happen to be writing like a really big, sarcastic, dark humor space opera, and then in which case I would be interested in that. It tends to be like that kind of personal development thought leader. So, somebody with an established platform who really is like in self-development, wellness kind of space. It's books that make people's lives better. That's kind of like my kind of remit. So that's what I'm always on the lookout for, and particularly with underrepresented groups. I'm very much in the kind of neurodivergent space at the moment. I've got a few ADHD and autistic authors, which is really exciting. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. So exciting. Well, thank you so much for being here. And listeners, I will see you next week. Ready to break up with burnout? I can show you how. With my unique blend of book and life coaching, I help writers craft stories they love, all without the imposter syndrome and perfectionism that gets in the way. Go to isabelsterling.com/coaching to learn more and schedule your free consultation. Until next week, happy writing.